Enter Talk Radio. You're in to all things music.
Prayer is one of the first things you get amnesia about. In a busy life, it's the first to go. Yeah. I had a very well-respected friend who had a personality like mine, and his motto was, pray as you go. And after I got sick, I realized, you know what I need to be about for the next season of life is pray while you sit.
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Tuesday to you all out there in internet radio land, and all you people who are going to listen in later to the archives. I thank you, and we appreciate you listening into the broadcast here and the interviews. Today, we're going to do part 2 of an interview we started a couple of weeks ago, and my guest is, once again, Mr. Charlie Peacock, who is a very prolific songwriter, music producer, musician, pianist, arranger, composer. He's won numerous awards in most every genre or field of music. And that piece that you just heard at the beginning is one of his pieces from his latest offering, jazz composition from a collection of jazz pieces he's just recently done. And I'm grateful that he took some time out to come back on the show and do part 2. Charlie is all those things, but more importantly to me, he's one of my best friends, and he is actually part of my coming to Christ. He was very instrumental in that, and for that, I'll always be grateful. And so, with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here's Mr. Charlie Peacock. How are you doing, Chuck?
Good. Good afternoon to you, Aaron. I'm eager to jump into part 2 of this interview.
Yeah, let's do that. When we ended part 1, I had just asked you about how you came to meet the Neelys at Warehouse Ministries and Exit Records, and you were telling me the story of your meeting Jimmy Abegg.
Yes, that's right. Jimmy had come with a guitar player named Ron Hall, and then started bringing his other friends to Maurice's American Bar in Sacramento to hear me play. And then we got to be friends, and we started playing together in a very short-lived band in March of 1983. And during that time, he took me out to a place called Warehouse Ministries, which was a affiliated Calvary Chapel amongst all the Calvary Chapels in California and beyond. And I was attending a Sacramento Calvary Chapel after my conversion, so I was a bit familiar with what those fellowships were about, and just sat down with Mary Neely, who was overseeing something called Songwriter Productions at that time, which became Exit Records. And, Jimmy's thing was, hey, I don't know what the future beats for you, but you should at least know about this, and maybe there's an opportunity there for you. And so I took the meeting, and then, I kind of went out from there. I was still working and playing out in the clubs and casuals and all sorts of things. And I'd also been working on both a large piece of music for a 4th of July pyro musical thing that was out at the State Fair. And then in addition to that, I was working on a ballet that I was getting ready to put on with the Sacramento Ballet. So I was doing a lot of playing my own music as well as composing some larger pieces. And during that time, too, I was still working at Heavenly Recording Studios as a producer, and also built my own studio, which was really the first of my studios with a company called Double Vision. And that was around June of 1983. So 82 and 83 were just incredibly busy years for me. And after I got to know the Neelys a little bit better, I remember meeting with Mary Neely's husband, Louis, and him saying, well, it's great that you have your studio, but we want to give you complete access to our studio. You have an 8-track studio, and we have a 24-track studio. So, maybe you should fold yours up and, give all your attention to this. You'll have a key. You can come here and work on music at any time. And through as the months went on, that's exactly what I did. And then, I brought you in to work on Vector, if you remember. Right. Of course you do. And I had been talking to you and Bongo Bob Smith about my new relationship as a follower of Jesus, and also you and I could talk other spiritual paths that people had on offer, right? And then I could bring, which were my first formative thoughts about apologetics. And I'm sure it was very lame, but nevertheless, in God's grace, both you and Bob
effective
came to know Jesus. And of course, during that time when you were able to meet Jimmy and Steve Griffith and Daryl Zachman, and then the guys in the 77s, and so you were around a lot of Christians who gave an explicit testimony.
Right.
And it just kind of evolved for me. At a very, very quickly, Mary Neely said, well, I want you to do your own record. And so really beginning in that fall of 1983 is when I started working on a record called Lie Down on the Grass. And I didn't know enough about what kind of distribution deal they had, or, publishing, or where the record would be released. I was just happy to be able to make my first recording, and they were the ones, who funded it through a deal that they had with Word Records, and that was the beginning. And while I was waiting to mix the record, I can remember Eric Heilman and I just playing a month or so of music down at Paraguay's, just the two of us, while I was sort of waiting to see what would happen with this record and at what scale it would be released and whether there would be any touring. I'd already had a little bit of interest from Bill Graham Productions. They had called me because of Bob. Bob had played him some of my music, and there was a woman there who had been a very popular DJ named Bonnie Simmons. And Bonnie got in touch with me about writing some songs for Carlos Santana. And that's how that relationship started.
Okay. Did you ever write songs for Carlos?
I did. And I don't think he ever heard them. So what they were doing was when Carlos would work on a record, he would always have an idea that was, completely left field and it would have no commercial traction at all. So what they would do is often gather songs together. So when it got to the point where the record company was saying, well, this is all great, but we need a, fill in the blank, that they would have some songs on offer for it.
Wow. Man. Yeah, those days back dealing with Bill Graham organization, they were pretty interesting for me as well. I used to get calls from them to go audition with people, and sometimes it seemed like a natural fit, and then sometimes it was like, well, I appreciate the call, but really?
Yeah.
You think I'm a fit for that?
But I think that's the way it was for all of us who are in sort of general age and coming up in music, is that you kind of took everything you could, and then you started to have some discernment about what you might ought to be doing and what your calling would look like, and be able to start saying no to things. And ultimately, I mean, nobody gets good at anything until they start saying no to other things.
Yeah.
But by November.
What?
Yeah, I was going to say that by November of 1983, even though I hadn't put out Lie Down the Grass, the newspapers that were in town, were writing about me and others. I can remember in June of that year, Bob Silver saying some nice things about me, pioneering original rock in Sacramento and whatnot. But then he said he's undergone a religious conversion and is now a born-again Christian. So it was now announced in the Sacramento Bee.
That's cool. Well, Bill Graham, they called me once to go audition for Billy Idol. And I didn't go because I knew if I went and if I did get the gig, it would have probably destroyed me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I understand. I understand. I mean, I think we've all been on those gigs, and we've either been perpetrators, perpetrated against, and eventually, that if this is how you're going to not only make your living, but have a calling, and for us, a calling from God to serve Him and His purposes in the church and in the world, in sort of a multitude of ways that we can do that musically, faithfully, then you got to put some of that other stuff away, and like you say, no, it's just not going to be good for me. I'm not going to do that.
Right. Have to move away.
That's right.
I remember you're calling me to do the Vector record, and then when I got there to do the record, you were starting your own solo thing, and you were no longer in Vector. I was like, well, that was fast.
Yeah. You're like, hey,
that's a fast transition.
Yeah.
But that's how
I did play on it.
Yeah, that's how I got to meet those guys, and
of course,
we had some great conversations about religion, faith, Christ, gurus, and all that sort of stuff, and never an argument.
Right.
We talked about that stuff very civilly and laughed and joked together. We'd be in a van coming from a gig or going to a gig, and having those conversations, and they were great conversations. You can't do that even on Facebook these days.
No, it's more difficult. And I think too, it was, I think Christians didn't have a chip on their shoulder about thinking that they were being marginalized.
Yeah.
Because there was still the last vestiges of the Jesus movement. And then secondly, it was also for baby boomers that were coming up in their 20s and 30s. They had already been raised in a really a hyper spiritual environment as a result of the 60s and early 70s. So there was already kind of a community conversation going on, especially amongst artistic people. So there wasn't just like a wholesale rejection of something in terms of kind of atheists against those who might seek the presence of God. There was a conversation, it really was. And it was civil.
Yeah. All right. So tell us how you got to Nashville. How did that come about?
Well, I had been a part of the Exit record scene, and like we were just talking about, started with Vector and began to produce some of the artists there, including, the 77s. And we were making videos and touring. I mean, I was fortunate to get connected with a booking agency in New York called Frontier Booking International, FBI. And there was a fellow there named John Huey who took an interest in me, and Ian Copeland, one of the Copeland brothers. And so, I got started. I think it was in early or late 1984. I got called to go out on the road with The Fix and General Public and Let's Act and several other groups I played on the road with, Red Hot Chili Peppers and others. And so that was kind of my first big shot, to get out there and promote and actually be something of a contender, at least at the college music level act, and that was all a result of the infrastructure that Mary Neely and Exit Records put under us. And through that, they allowed me to accept the management deal with Bill Graham. They allowed me to accept the publishing deal from CBS Songs in Los Angeles, and basically give away those rights that they had to my music, which was very gracious of them. And then from there, lots of doors opened up for me that went beyond what we were doing at Exit Records. And eventually, I had to make a choice. I sort of, the very last thing that I did for Exit is I had a lot of interest at Atlantic Records and did a showcase at the Roxy. And that was going to be my moment. I mean, Ahmet Ertegun was there, and it was the full press. And then my guy, as many people have the same story, my guy there ended up being let go. And so that kind of ended my deal. And I didn't like the management situation I was in. I got another manager after Bill Graham. I can remember just a horrible time being at the Beverly Hills Hotel, sitting poolside with a manager that I just thought, what in the world am I doing here? This is not what I want my life to be about. Well, then shortly after that, a friend of mine, Dan Russell, whom I believe from the Eastern Seaboard, Boston area, he had told an artist named Margaret Becker about me. So she had gone to him for a consult, and Dan just told her, he said, who you need to meet is Charlie Peacock, and have him produce your next record. And so Sparrow Records called me, and I went down there, had a meeting with Bill Hearn and Peter York, and they started finding out about me, and that's when we were playing at down at the Wild Blue in Fresno. Yeah. And you remember that? And,
I do.
Bill and Peter came there. This was after I'd already produced Margaret's record, turned it in, and then Bill and Peter came in, I believe it was in, probably the early spring, late winter of 1989, and they came and heard us play. And I mean, you remember what it was like in those days. I mean, we would play, for 3 or 4 hours, and every set we'd pump it up higher, right? And get the energy, just magnetic. And they were not used to seeing that. So, I mean, it was just guys from the street doing what you do,
You're right, yeah.
Regardless of the, very real fact that we had begun to follow Jesus, we were still new, we still felt like, hey, man, we got to show up and we got to bring it.
Right.
So they drove up from Los Angeles to hear that. And I went to their hotel room afterwards and they said, listen, we can't make you promises. We can sign you to a record deal, which we want to do. And we can support you in everything that you do. We can help you get, create a production deal for you. But we honestly believe that if you will move to Nashville, you will never stop working.
Really?
And so, I went out there to mix Margaret's record, and I just fell in love with Nashville. I just thought, man, this is where we're supposed to be. I mean, we've been praying a lot about what our family should do. And the irony of it is that Jimmy Abegg and his family and our family had driven through Nashville in 1988 on a summer trip around the United States and played a bit. And I remember driving through Nashville and saying, "This place is a pit. Who would live here?" And so it just goes to show you. And of course, it was just where we were at. What we were seeing. Right. And so I came out here, I was here for a week, stayed with Peter York and his wife, Michelle, and kids. And by the end of the week, I was calling Andy saying, you got to fly out. And we need to look for a house here. And she was like, well, slow down. But she came out and we just knew we had, we were just in agreement about it. And so we made the move in July of 1989, and the vision that Peter and Bill had for me, I mean, it was exactly right on the money. I mean, I landed here, started writing for Amy Grant, created my record, The Secret of Time, with Brown Bannister. Went right into producing Phil Keaggy and Kim Hill and Al Green and Twyla Paris, and then at that point, Brown Bannister kind of kicked me out of the nest, and I started on my own. And the first production completely on my own, apart from the Margaret Becker record, was Out of the Gray. So I'd landed here, and I had my first Grammy nomination. I had written a song for and done arranging and keyboards on a 5 million selling record. And it was just like the guy said, I just put my head down and worked for 10 years.
Man, you have been busy. You
hit
the ground running.
Hit the ground running, and was privileged to work with so many great artists and to do some of my own meaningful tours. I mean, one of which you were, a big part of, the Love Life tour.
Yeah,
and,
I need to tell you something that just happened to me last week.
Okay.
I was out west with Kevin Max, and we're driving from California to Portland.
Okay.
And of course, we have to go over the Donner Pass.
Oh yeah.
And it was really quiet in the car, and our road manager had never been across the pass and didn't know the history of the Donner Pass. So we kind of enlightened him. And after we told him the history of the Donner Pass, I added in a little history of my own. I said, Now, if you look to your left, you'll see the traffic coming down the freeway. So I was once on a tour with Charlie Peacock, and we had a bus that coasted from Oregon down to Redding.
Yeah.
over the Donner Pass. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Oh man, we were like on the side and just barely coasting.
Right. Yeah.
And I said,
I think every musician has a crazy, bus story. If you're fortunate to get to the level to even have a bus, you definitely have a crazy bus story.
Yeah, a lot of crazy stories. That was a lot of fun. I was listening to part one of the interview, and you made this comment early on when we were talking about when we were meeting Peterbilt and what Peter had planned to do and stuff like that. And you said that we were like forecasting where music was going, and we didn't want to look back or go backwards. We wanted to move forward. Now,
right.
when you're forecasting, because as a producer and a writer and arranger and stuff, and like you always want to be ahead of the game to create something, maybe something new in a certain genre, or the way you produce it, or in some way. Mm-hmm. What do you use as a barometer to forecast or try to figure out where things are going?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I've done it is, you put together an ability to recognize familiarity, and then if you're willing, you can become a student of history of music, and I think that's a part of our generation, is to if we needed to, we could play in a Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman swing band, or play in a rock band. And so with that in mind, as I became a record producer, I was already on the road to eclecticism, which meant that if I got good at being a record producer, I would be able to work in many genres, because I knew enough that I could take that genre apart if I needed to, like taking a car apart, and name all the parts of it and have some sense of like where they fit in musical history. So I think that's kind of the first place. You got to come from somewhere, I think is what I'm trying to say. And then once you've done that, once you have that in your head and under your fingertips, then you can begin to ask questions about the music, and contrasting newness with familiarity. And the way that I generally get to newness is not necessarily through taking an idea that is already fresh, a contemporary idea, and then put my own take on it. The way I get to new is to fail a lot, to put myself in situations where I fail, to create a lot of chaos that I need to organize and bring form and shape to. And then I also have spent a lot of my career inventing for myself ways that I get at stuff in a fresh way. And that might be something as simple as, writing lyrics first instead of melody and chords. It might be something as simple as starting with something that is out of time, a performance that's out of time, that's improvisational. It might be 5 minutes of some sort of, guitar or piano, not to a click, and to listen to places in the music that, tell me, come get me. And then maybe, I find 5 bars that I think are saying, come get me. And I get them. And I throw away everything else. And I might start with just those 5 bars and see where that takes me. Because everything is about a choice and a counter choice, a problem and then a creative solution. And so I would say, for me, that's how I try to get at something fresh, is to be both familiar and to come up with things that you haven't heard before.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Now, how did you come about that? I mean, that's obviously something you learned over a period of time. I'm pretty sure you started off on sort of a track as trying to emulate other producers and singers, songwriters that you liked.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's that period of time where you're emulating and you know it, and that period where you're emulating and you don't know it, you think you're doing something. And you have to pass through all of that to a place, again, like I'm saying, where you develop analytical skills that aren't about, holding an instrument or playing an instrument. They're about seeing something first in your imagination. And then you begin to apply it to something. So I'm a big believer that musicians should be, highly skilled musicians are people who don't need instruments. They could draw you the music, they could paint the music, they could sing the music for you. They could take sounds and create the music with that you can't be limited by your tools. I mean, great tools are wonderful to have, but if all you have is great tools and no imagination, you're not going to get anywhere.
Amen. It's like the old story of the...
I was going to say, but again, great tools are good to have.
Yeah, they are. It's like the story of the Stradivarius in the hands of a beginning violinist and an old, no-name, no-brand violin in the hands of a master violinist.
That's right. Yeah, there is that visceral, mechanical part of it, like moving the digits, the arms, the legs, the feet, the head, all of that, and how you learn to do that, and how your hands interact with sticks or guitar strings or piano. That all should develop at the same time that your imagination is developing.
Right.
Then if you're free in a technical sense, then you're free to imagine anything.
That's true. That's why
I studio, believe... I would say the studio became that for me more than as much as, when I was young, I pointed my compass towards songwriting and trying to be a jazz piano player. But I think as time went on, I learned, calling-wise, I was definitely called to be a songwriter and do my own artistry. But all of the skills really came together under the banner of production. Okay. And, I'd have to mention, I don't know if I did last time, but I'd have to mention David Kahn in that, who you worked with Romeo Void. I have to mention him because he was the first record producer that I met who kind of fulfilled what I became, in that, you need help writing songs? Okay, here, I'll help you. You need an arrangement? Okay, I'll help you. You need a string arrangement? Okay, I got you covered. And just had so many abilities, engineering, producing, all of that. And I sort of thought, oh, okay, that's the standard. The only other record producer I'd seen, and that was just for one day, was a guy named Skip Drinkwater, who had, I don't know if you remember, produced Norman Connor's "You Are My Starship."
Oh, yeah.
I don't, for all I know, you may have even worked with him before. But he was really the only producer that I had ever been around. And he was more of the school of the encouragement school, where David was more of the sort of wizard, guru, guide, school, which is, and just sort of providing for every need for the artist and the music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, with this new instrumental record you have out,
yes.
How have you been writing for that for a while? And was that a result of like having spent so much time writing lyrics and stuff, and I know you to be a jazz bow, so and I know that you can't get away from that. So, is your new record like a spillover for at last I can do this and get this out, and you know what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah, sure. I think we talked about me arriving in Nashville in 1989, and I worked solid up through 1999 or 1998, so a 10-year period. And I'd have to look on All Music Guide, but I produced at least 50 albums during that time, and of course hundreds and hundreds of tracks, and wrote many songs. So by that time, I was pretty burnt out on the form in terms of a 3.5 minute, 4.5 minute song form, and the whole idea of an 8-bar verse into a 4-bar pre-chorus, into an 8-bar chorus, to a 2-bar turnaround, and that kind of form. Now, I wasn't doing that myself. I mean, if you listen to the records that I put out, I was, doing a lot more than that and experimenting with song form. Even had songs that started and never returned to any ideas. They just went for 3.5 minutes and then stopped, But that was my lab, that I still saw artistry as it was my role in the world, in the culture, to try and make things that were new and different, and sort of push the music along through history. No matter how small my contribution might be, it wasn't about that. It was about being faithful to something that I thought was true about what it meant to be an artist. So around that time, Andy and I, my wife Andy and I, we took a year. We went to seminary, and when we came back home, we just kind of took care of our family for a bit, and I was really at the, one of the groups that I had signed and developed was just blowing up, the band Switchfoot. So I kind of came home from seminary into this kind of gift that keeps on giving, And we had 2 major hit singles at Top 40 Radio. And that kind of set the stage for me to get back into music. But before I had gone to seminary, I had met Jeff Coffin, wonderful saxophonist, at a Tower of Power gig. And he said, hey, we should record. We should play together. He didn't say record. And so I took him up on it, but I said, let's just record. So we made a record together, and then I'd also made some solo piano recordings. So that was kind of the start of it. And then 2005 was when I really got serious about the compositional piece of it, and some sort of hybrid between electronica and composition, improvisation. So I put together several things here in Nashville with Victor Wooten and others. I arranged all that into compositions because they were all improvisations. And then I took that up to New York and recorded with a number of jazz musicians there, and then brought that back and edited it into a record called Love Press Excuria. So that was kind of, how it really got started. I came back to jazz really because it was where I started, and it was something I needed to do for my musical health.
Right. That's what I figured. It's like almost like a cleansing.
Yes, absolutely. And it helped me. It helped me jump back into production. Although when I jumped back into it, I was more serving the needs of the indie music community in Nashville. Helped make a film on a group called 10 Out of 10, which was a young singer-songwriter artist collective. So that was kind of my entry back into it. And, I wouldn't have been able to enter back into it if I hadn't started making those improvisational records. And so, as you said, I've since made a solo piano album called Lemonade. And then the track that you were playing is from a record called When Light Flashes that was put out this year.
And where can listeners purchase this record?
Well, it's on Spotify, and if you want to purchase it, which of course I encourage you to, you can get it on iTunes or Amazon. And for one of the record, for When Light Flashes, there's CDs as well.
Okay. So tell us what you got coming up.
Well, for any people out there who loved a record that Jimmy Abegg and Vince Ebo and I did called West Coast Diaries Volume 2, I have good news in that a friend of mine, is putting that out on vinyl. Which should happen here, before the year's end. So I think that's probably the next project that's coming out. And then I write pretty prolifically for Facebook as well, for the big music collection that they're putting together.
Yeah. How often do you submit tunes to Facebook?
Either every month or every 2 months.
Cool. Yeah, Brent just put.
That's been. Yeah, go ahead. Tell me what you're saying about Brent.
I said Brent just put out a collection on Facebook a couple of days ago.
Good. Now, did you play on some of it?
I've played on 3 of those. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so I think that that's been a really good thing for me. I got sick. I got really sick about a year and a half ago, and still struggle with that a little bit. So working at home, just being able to create at home is something that works for me physically and emotionally. And because I came back, when I came back to music, like I was saying, after seminary, I worked as a head of A&R for a record label. And then I got back into songwriting. I worked as an A&R person and songwriter for Sony ATV. And then began to work with the independent artist community here, including my now daughter-in-law, Ruby Amagfa. And
what do you guys do together?
We do a good bit, in terms of some of the Facebook music that we do.
Okay.
I have, when they were on Ryko Disc, I did a single with her and her then partner. And so once I was going with that, I was in that community, and I was doing a lot of counseling, having artists come to me and say, help, what do I do next? think a big part of my life was filled up to that. And one of those artists was Joy Williams. And she, I got to know her through that, and her parents at the Mount Hermon Retreat Center in Santa Cruz. And through that meeting, I just got asked to take her and her new songwriting partner, John Paul White, into the studio. And we went in the studio and created an EP that had a song called Poison and Wine on it. And that song just blew up, and the rest was history. I mean, we put out that EP on the Civil Wars. They played, Grey's Anatomy played Poison and Wine in its full, 4-minute long version. And people asked for it, wanted to know about it. And the group got out on the road, and then we created their first, full length called Barton Hollow. And that was a gold record. And they were out touring with Adele. And, and then we made a second record. And we won Grammys for both records.
Wow,
so
that's great.
Out of that, I ended up, doing a number of other recordings, and then I became the kind of got the burnout thing again, and so I took a huge challenge to create the curriculum at a university for a contemporary music program, combination of artistry and business. And out of that, I was hired to run that program, to build it. And then shortly thereafter, I was hired to be the director of the School of Music. And then, a year went by, and that's when I got sick, and that brings us up to date.
Wow. And so you're no longer at the school, is that correct?
No, I'm not at Lipscomb University, no.
Yeah.
Ironically, Brown Bannister took my place. He was one of the first people I met when I moved to Nashville.
Well, darn, man, you sure have had a great life here in Nashville and in Sacramento and in Yuba City, and hearing the story and visualizing the trail, from Yuba to here and now, how your persistence and your faith and strength of your family and support have really kind of held you up, and you've been faithful to all of that, all of those helps.
Well, yes, and what I've learned is that all of life is about God, people, and place, and that God is the overseer of all that, but there's no neutrality in people or place. And your friendships and your collaborations form you, and where you grow up forms you. The ideas that you pursued, or the ideas that were poured into you, the people who did it, the power of the place of where you lived, that makes you one kind of person in the world and not another. And as a disciple of Christ, you're always asking and saying, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And because of that, am I going in the right direction? Am I in the right place with the right people within your will?
And that's encouraging. Thank you for that. I think I'm going to go pray.
Yeah.
That's great.
Prayer is one of the first things you get amnesia about.
Right. Exactly.
In a busy life, it's the first to go. Yeah. a very well-respected friend who had a personality like mine, and his motto was "Pray as you go." And after I got sick, I realized, you know what I need to be about for the next season of life is pray while you sit. I've spent most of my life as a disciple under this pray as you go, because so busy doing things that you believe are important, not only to your family, but to those around you. In particular, I mean, when you're given the opportunity for your music to go, not only beyond your hometown, but out into the world and travel around. That's an incredible privilege and honor, and there's many people that you and I know who've never had that opportunity, right. and great musicians. Right. And so I don't take that lightly. To me, that is about what Jesus has done in me by, in a sense, saving me from myself, saving me from my ego, saving me from building a whole life around my wants and needs. And that's not that I'm not selfish, because I'm an incredibly selfish person, but I'm way less selfish than I would be without Christ.
Well, wow, man, that's great to hear from you, and I know it's encouraging to people that will listen to the show because you've really been an encouragement to me ever since I've known you, and we've had some great times together. You were very instrumental in not only my salvation, but introducing me to Nashville and introducing people to me that were here, giving me opportunities to record and tour and be a part of your creative process. And you gave me a lot of freedom in that, and you were not, and probably still are not, like a lot of producers in this town. You are very eclectic, and that's great for me. That's a great field of opportunity for me to be amongst a producer, singer, songwriter, and friend who is very eclectic.
I wouldn't thank you, Aaron, for saying that. I wouldn't trade, the musical life I've had for any other life. And I will say, as a record producer, I mean, one of the reasons that I don't like to, spend most of my life in the studio anymore is that there's incredible music being made. There's more great singers and solid songwriting than I've ever done in my lifetime. But there's very little innovation short of somebody like a Kendrick Lamar. Most of the people that I would have the ability to work with at my age and genre-wise are a part of communities where they're communally constructed ideas about the music they want to hear, and really aren't that interested in making something that no one has heard before. Whereas you and I grew up in a time where touring was made up of Miles Davis and Neil Young and the Pointer Sisters or whatever it might be. I mean, all of these different kinds of music lived together on the same stages.
Right.
And that was just an extraordinary way to think about music, and people respected and loved a lot of different kinds of music, and those music were allowed to mingle together. Whereas there's no way you would go out and see a concert now that for us would not have been incongruent, but for today's audience it would leave them scratching their head saying, what does this have to do with that?
Right.
Whereas, we would have never said that. We would have said, oh, that's so cool. We got to see, Weather Report, and there's this really great singer-songwriter that opened the show.
Mm-hmm.
Because all those things, all of them interest us.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see that there was a huge gap between, Joni Mitchell and Weather Report or Miles Davis. We saw these things working together, and a lot of the players worked on the same music.
Right.
And we knew, you and I knew for sure, and a lot of our friends, that it was jazzers who were making a lot of this music with pop people, in the same way that, Dr. Dre surrounded himself with jazzers to make a lot of his iconic rap and hip hop records.
Right. Yeah. And man, we were blessed to come up in the era and the environment that we did. And I am very blessed to have you on the show today and to hear your story. And as we're running out of time here, I just want to thank you again for doing
thank you.
two hours. And I love you much. I love your family. And we'll get together soon over some bread.
That would be sweet. Andy's got a dream.
This is Jackie Bertone from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be the music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear from Eclectica Studios. I'm a full-time mixing and recording engineer. I work with Grammy winners, labels, and indie artists, using state-of-the-art digital mixing and restoration tools and the very best in analog gear. Really, though, it's my ability to bring tracks to life and fulfill your vision for your music. This has made me sought after by producers and artists worldwide. So spend your time working on music and not chasing a mix down a rabbit hole. Go to timdolbear.com and check out our free one-song mix offer.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.